უნივერსიტეტის აფსტილი პარტიი უმასპინძლოს საერთაშორისო განათლების ექსპერტს დოქტორ გრეგორი სეილსის საჯარო ლექციას. ბატონი სეილსი არის განათლების სფეროში 9 წიგნისა და 50-მდე სტატიის ავტორი თუ თანაავტორი. ის არის ასევე მილენიუმის პროგრამის კონსულტანტი მასწავლებლებისა და სკოლის დირექტორების განვითარების პროექტის ფარგლებში. დიდი ხნის გამოწვევა აქვს საქართველოში საქმიანი ურთიერთობებისა. ახლა დღევანდელი საჯარო ლექცია მეტად საინტერესო საკითხებს ეხება. ეს იქნება საინტერესო არა მხოლოდ განათლების მიმართულების სტუდენტებისათვის, არამედ ზოგადად განათლების სფეროში დაკავებული ადამიანებისათვის, ამდენადაც არაფრის მნიშვნელობა ჩვენ ვსწავლობთ თუ ვასწავლით, იმიტომ რომ საგანმანათლებლო სფერო დღეს დიდად განსხვავდება წინა საუკუნეებში არსებული საგანმანათლებლო სფეროებისაგან. უკვე ისეთ ახალ პრაქტიკებზე, ახალ მიდგომებზე არის აქცენტი გაკეთებული, რაზეც წინა საუკუნეებში და რამოდენიმე ათეული წლის უკან ამაზე საერთოდ ლაპარაკი არ იყო. მე ვუთმობ საჯარო ლექციას ბატონ სეილს და იმედი მაქვს, რომ იმ პრაქტიკებს, რომელსაც ის დღეს საჯარო ლექციაზე განიხილავს, ჩვენს ვეცდებით რომ დავნერგოთ უნივერსიტეტში და თქვენ როგორც მომავალი თაობა ამას ძალიან საინტერესოდ სასარგებლოდ მიიჩნევთ და თქვენ უფრო მეტად წარმატებულად განავითარებთ მათ თქვენს კონკრეტულ პირად პრაქტიკულ საქმიანობაში თუ განათლების და საგანმანათლებლო საქმიანობაში. დიდი მადლობა მოგზაურობისათვის. იმედი მაქვს, რომ ეს ლექცია იქნება ძალების მომცემი თქვენთვის. დარწმუნებული ვარ, რომ არის ძალიან საინტერესო ლექცია და უკვე დავუწყოთ ასპარეზი.
მოგესალმებით ყველას, მადლობა მინდა გითხრათ, რომ დაინტერესდით ჩვენი დღევანდელი ლექციით. მინდა წარმოვიდგინოთ ჩვენი დღევანდელი სპიკერი, ბატონი გრეგ სეილსი, რომელიც გახლავთ ათასწლეულის გამოწვევის კორპორაციის კონსულტანტი. ეს არის ძალიან გამოცდილი კონსულტანტი ზოგადი განათლების საკითხებზე. ბატონი გრეგი ჩვენთან უკვე 1 წელია მუშაობს. ქართული რა თქმა უნდა ესმის. ჩვენი დღევანდელი ლექცია იქნება ინგლისურ ენაზე, რადგანაც თემა არის ისეთი, რომ საკმაოდ რთულია თარგმნა საკითხის. საუბარი იქნება ახალ მიდგომებზე პედაგოგიკაში. ჩვენ როგორც ვიცი, აქ წარმოდგენილები არიან სტუდენტები ილიანის, რომელსაც ეს თემა აინტერესებს, განათლების მეცნიერებების და ვთქვი, თქვენთვის განსაკუთრებით საინტერესო იქნება ის საკითხები, რაზეც ბატონი გრეგი დღეს ისაუბრებს. ბატონი გრეგი გახლავთ განათლების მეცნიერებათა დოქტორი, პროფესორი, ძალიან დიდი გამოცდილება აქვს რამოდენიმე უნივერსიტეტში ლექტორად მუშაობის და მნიშვნელოვანი ჩვენთვის მისი ჩართულობა გახლავთ, რადგანაც ჩვენ მოგეხსენებათ ათასწლეულის გამოწვევის ფონდი, რომელსაც მე წარმოვადგენ, ამერიკის მთავრობის დაფინანსებით იწყებს ახალ ძალიან მასშტაბურ პროექტს ზოგადი განათლების სექტორში. ეს გახლავთ მასწავლებლებისა და სკოლის დირექტორების პროფესიული განვითარების პროექტი. აქცენტი კეთდება საბუნებისმეტყველო სპეციალობების, საგნების, ინგლისური ენის და ისტის პედაგოგებზე, სადაც განსაკუთრებული დეფიციტიც გვაქვს პედაგოგების, თქვენ მოგეხსენებათ ჩემს უკეთ და კვალიფიკაციის ასე ვთქვათ, კუთხით გამოწვევებით გვაქვს ბევრი. კვლევებმა აჩვენა და სასერტიფიკატო გამოცდება აჩვენა, რომ საბუნებისმეტყველო დარგის პედაგოგებს განსაკუთრებით სჭირდებათ დახმარება, პროფესიული განვითარება და ამ მიზნით ჩვენ ფონდის ორგანიზებით ჩვენ უცხოელ პარტნიორებთან ერთად ვახორციელებთ ზოგადი განათლების დარგში პროექტს, რომლის ფარგლებშიც ყველა საბუნებისმეტყველო საგნის პედაგოგს საქართველოში მომავალი წლიდან ექნება საშუალება მიიღოს, ასე ვთქვათ, გაიაროს გადამზადების კურსები, ტრენინგები და ბატონიკელის დღევანდელი ლექციაც თავის მხრივ ისაუბრებს იმ მიდგომებზე, რომელთა დანერგვა გვსურს ჩვენ საქართველოში. პროექტი, როგორც გითხარით, არის დონორის დაფინანსებული, 14 მილიონი ამერიკული დოლარი გამოყო ამერიკის მთავრობამ ამ პროექტისთვის და 4 წლის მანძილზე მოხდება ამ პროექტის განხორციელება. ჩვენ ძალიან მალე გვექნება პროექტის უკვე პრეზენტაცია, დეტალურად გაგაცნობთ დაინტერესებულ მხარეებს ამ პროექტის მიზნები და აქტივობები. ხოლო დღეს გვექნება ეგრეთ წოდებული მოკლე ბლიც, ესე ვთქვათ, ლექცია, რომ გავიგოთ თუ რა კონცეფციაზეა საუბარი და რა არის დღეს მსოფლიოში არსებული გამოცდილება პედაგოგიკის მიმართულებით და ისაც შეიძლება რომ ჩვენ განსაკუთრებით, ასე ვთქვათ, გავაკეთოთ ნახტომი, ასე ვთქვათ, გავითვალისწინოთ ის შეცდომები, რაც ქვეყნებმა დაუშვეს ამ მიმართულებით და იგივე არ გავაკეთოთ, ანუ შევთავაზოთ ისეთი სახის პროფესიული განვითარება დღეს ჩვენს პედაგოგებს და იმ მომავალ პედაგოგებს, ვისაც პროფესიაში შესვლა სურს. და თქვენ იცით, რომ ქვეყანაში ერთ-ერთი მნიშვნელოვანი რეფორმა, რაც განათლების სექტორში მიმდინარეობს, არის სწორედ პედაგოგების და სკოლის დირექტორების პროფესიული განვითარება, სქემა პროფესიაში შესვლის და პროფესიის, ასე ვთქვათ, და განვითარების და ამ სქემის, ასე ვთქვათ, ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანი ამ სქემისთვის არის ის აქტივობა, რომელსაც ჩვენი პროექტი გააკეთებს. მოკლედ ეს იყო რისი თქმა მინდოდა თქვენთვის, მადლობა მიგაგიხრათ ყურადღებისთვის, თუ რაიმე შეკითხვა გაქვთ, შეგიძლიათ რომ დამისვათ, თუ არა, წარმოგიდგენ პროფესორ გრეგორს და გადავცემ მასივით.
I want to add my thanks to all of you for coming. I have a couple quick questions before we get going. How many of you are students? Just raise your hand if you're a student. Do we have anyone here who's teaching in a classroom? And do we have any university instructors or professors here? Okay, so a little bit of everyone. Anyone here from an NGO? Ministry of Education? Okay, so a few folks. My friends are up here in the front row, at least I think they're my friends. Maybe by the time this is over they won't know who I am, but and I guess in the second row as well. The rest of you, again, welcome. Unfortunately, I'm limited to English. If I'm speaking too quickly or you don't understand what I'm saying, just wave your hand and stop me and we'll try to clear it up, okay? Now, I was invited to do a lecture, but I'm not really a lecturer, and this topic doesn't lend itself to lectures. Modern education is not really a lecture forum, and you'll learn more about that as I talk today. So I'm going to ask you to interact with me at times throughout my presentation or through this session, and I'm going to have you engage in a few activities that I hope will model a little bit some of what happens in a modern classroom. We won't, because of time constraints, really be able to demonstrate as much as I would like, or as I'm sure most of you would appreciate in order to really fully understand the modern education environment. But it'll be a little start, and then I'll give you some information at the end that I hope will help you continue with your investigations, okay? Now, up here on the screen I have the title screen, Engineering the Experience. How you teach influences learning, assessment, and satisfaction. And what I'd like you to do is think about, why would I choose that title? Why wouldn't I instead maybe just call it Modern Educational Methods or something like that? Just think about it a bit. Anybody have any idea what that title might, why I might have selected that title? I didn't think you'd have any ideas. By the time this is finished, I hope you'll be able to explain the title to me, okay? Anybody want to guess about what this title might mean?
Maybe education is process of engineering and building all this stuff.
Okay, the idea of education being an engineering process. Okay.
I mean to construct something as engineers are constructing.
Okay, kind of construction approach. Okay. Any of the students have ideas? Tamar?
And as it is very light process, it is difficult to differ which is modern, and because we are taking all the time with old methods as well, and this is continuing.
Okay, so it's an evolving activity that takes some old approaches and some new approaches. All right, those are all good ideas. Let's move on a little bit. Think about that second line, though, as we go through the presentation today. I'd like you to think about how you teach and how it can influence learning, assessment, and satisfaction. Okay? I'll share my thoughts on what I thought it meant when we get near the end of the presentation. But I want to hear yours at the same time. So what I'm going to cover today, it's kind of a crazy short period of time to tell you all about modern education. But what I'm going to try to do is give you some foundational information and model some methods. So I'm going to give you some sort of broad overview, context kind of things to help you understand what I think of when I think of education, and especially in a modern context. Then I'm going to give you some sort of basic philosophy, models, theory kind of stuff. But I'm going to keep that really short. I'm really showing that to you so you know it exists and you can go find it and use it in your work. And then some methods. I'm just going to show you some samplings of some ideas and point you in the direction where you might find a bunch more. Now, often when people talk about the modern education environment, they talk about education and training. All of you are in some way associated with education. Anybody tell me what training is? How is training different than education? This isn't going to work very well unless some of you offer up some ideas.
Training is more short course of teaching something new, but it's for 2 or 3 days or something like that. It's very short, fast, and efficient.
Okay, training might be shorter, faster, and more efficient. Those are certainly certain training definitely look like that. Does that mean education is longer and less efficient? Is that?
Yes, or something for improvement.
Okay, training is to improve a. Okay.
Knowledge, skills, or
All right.
always requires basic and education.
All right. Well, a lot of people have an idea about training. Let me give you just a short sort of goal for training, in my opinion. I think generally the goal of training is to prepare somebody to do one specific thing, to be a welder, to use a certain methodology, to learn how to use a particular piece of software. You take training for very focused activities, usually with a very defined outcome to them. Does that give you any ideas about what education might be? Some of you young ladies need to step up and offer ideas here. Education typically is broader. You know, the goal is really to enable learners to do what they want to do, whether that's become an architect, an engineer, to run a construction company, to have a fashion store, to become a farmer, to run a repair shop for automobiles. Education gives you the broader set of skills that you need to sort of figure out your path in life. Now, at one point, when you have enough education, it starts to focus and hone in and become very specialized. Almost training, but not quite. Because it still gives you the tools that you need to do the job. It doesn't teach you the exact steps to do something. Now, you'll notice my continuum there, the arrow, is kind of lopsided. It's because I think there's this whole other category of stuff that gets treated like education. But in my mind, it's really just information dissemination. And the goal of it is to just put information out there. Now the difference between information dissemination and training or education is, with training and education you have an outcome in mind. With information dissemination, you just kind of push a bunch of information out and hope that people learn from it what you want. But you haven't really structured it in a way for them to come away with a certain set of understanding. So, some of you are teachers, some of you are students, some of you work in education in other ways. Where would you fall in that continuum? Are you sitting in a classroom where it's really just information dissemination? You'll notice, maybe I need to back up, but there's a picture there of a man, a professor, giving a lecture. And often, especially in big universities and in graduate school, the lectures are just professors standing there talking, telling you about a subject that was in a chapter that you read. The professor doesn't structure that learning experience in any way. They don't engineer it for you to learn. What they do instead is they just talk and hope that you get something out of it. The same with blogs and websites and information resources online, newspapers, magazines, books. All of these are information dissemination. Somebody prints it, mails it out, hopes somebody buys it and reads it, hope they learn something from it. But there is no specific outcome in mind. Increasingly, education goes to the information side. People are doing a lot of, for one thing, there's a lot more information than there was 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So people are pushing information out very quickly and hoping you learn from it. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work out so well. Now I'm going to jump just a little bit from education to the term teacher. How many of you here are planning to be or already are teachers? How many teachers? How many want to be teachers? How come nobody's raising their hand? There's a teacher, a couple of people want to be teachers. What do all you young ladies want to be? Are you students in education?
Some of them are their psychology, they're studying psychology.
Okay, a little different, all right? Well, I've made up this definition of a teacher, but I think it's kind of a modern definition. It says that a teacher that the word teacher is an outdated term. Okay, now that might scare you if you are a teacher, and I may use the word teacher occasionally because it's still a very popular word in our lexicon, in our vocabulary. But in reality, the word teacher has a lot of baggage to it. To teach, people think about teaching as to teach. Well, that isn't what modern education is about. You know, this paragraph at the end says in earlier times, meaning today or yesterday or 100 years ago, a teacher was a person who stood in front of a group and talked to them, like I'm doing now. Unfortunately, that's not a good way to communicate information. You know, it goes on to say the process was believed to facilitate the transfer of knowledge from one person to another. Just because I talk to you doesn't mean you're going to know any more at the end. You may have a few facts, but you may not know what to do with them. What modern education is about is trying to change that. Stop me pouring information out and hoping you absorb it and understand what to do with it, but rather to help you to learn what you need to know and how you need to do it. So what we're going to do is shift the focus from teachers to educators, first of all, and think about yourself as an educator. The role now isn't to teach, but the role is to educate. It's a subtle difference, but to educate means to help people learn, whereas to teach means to push information out to them. So as we shift focus, we want to get away from how much have I covered. Have any of you been in a class where you had the textbook and you just read one page and then you read the next page and then you read the next page? I see one head nodding here and the rest of you don't understand a word I'm saying. Did you understand what I was saying there?
Yes, it's quite common experience.
All the
just
time.
Covering pages.
It's a common experience to cover pages? Yeah. When I was a graduate student at a very large university and I was taking a statistics course, the professor did exactly what the man in this picture is doing. He had his back to the class, and he wrote on the board. And the entire class, all he did was write formulas on the board and talk to the board. You know, his face was at the board, and he'd say, you know, X minus 7, you know, and the sum of, and all of us are sitting there going, what? And it was probably 2 weeks, 3 weeks into the course before I ever saw the front of the man. All I ever saw was the back. He was writing. To him, that was teaching. Please don't do that. And also don't do what you see in so many classrooms. Not just in Georgia, but many places in the world, where you have a textbook and the teacher stands at the front teaching, not educating, and says to you, the student, okay, would you read page 1 to us? And then, okay, read page 2, page 3, and you just go through the book. And their goal, in many cases, is to finish the book. How much do they cover? The whole book. As an educator, instead, you should be focused on how do I ensure that they learn. You're trying to educate them now. So you're not just covering pages. You're actually hoping that they understand what's on the pages. That's a big difference. You're going to have to get a little more engaged at this point, because I'm going to ask you some questions and actually give you some activities. So if you need more help understanding them, let me know and we'll have someone translate. Okay? But right now, I want you to think about, how do you prefer to learn? If you could be in charge, how would you learn? Would you read a book by yourself? Talk with your friends? Watch a movie? Build an example of something? Create through writing? What would you do? Any ideas? Somebody from this side of the room. How do you prefer to learn?
We're doing.
I heard it from doing over here. Here are some examples. Which of these would you prefer?
Investigating.
More practice or
Exploring? Practice?
practice experience.
Practical experience? Okay.
Just an experience, good.
All right. Maybe this will help. I'm going to give each row one of these envelopes. And in the envelope, you will find some cards. And in the cards, you may open the envelope. I want you to consider the row that you're sitting in a group. Maybe 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. But follow these directions. You're in a group. You remove the things that are inside the envelope. And you discuss what they mean in regards to learning. And then I want you to rank them in order from the worst way to learn to the best way to learn, in your opinion. Different groups will have different answers. So take a couple minutes and do that.
You know, like in the museum, you're looking at it, you're reading it.
In conjunction with other more interactive learning. All right, so I'll put demonstration. Demonstration is very similar to
Presentation, demonstration. Presenting should go up front, because when you have to present,
you have to know it.
It's okay? You're done?
we win.
I saw somebody said we win. This was not a race. This was not about who got finished first. Actually, there's an exact order I'm looking for, and unless you get it right, you have to keep doing it. No, not really. The experience that you just had. Tell me a few things about that experience.
We are different.
You didn't all learn best the same way, right?
Yes.
Okay. What else did you learn? What about the experience itself? Was it a thing you did alone? No, it was in groups.
Okay, so work together.
We were working together, discussing, kind of reaching a compromise.
Discussion.
You got to do all the things that demonstration
You all thought that there were certain activities you agreed upon as the best? Okay. Was it a nice, quiet activity?
Oh, almost.
I thought you were noisy. I had to calm you down. Could you have done that if your desks were all lined up in a row and not touching each other?
No.
Would have been difficult. You had to be close. You had to each see this set of things. So it was noisy, a little messy. You collaborated, compromised, found out things about other people that are maybe different from yourself. So these are all learning experiences. It's kind of the way the modern classroom looks. Has anybody heard of Dale's cone? Oh, you're about to. Edgar Dale is a guy who many, many years ago created this thing that's called now Dale's cone of experiences, or experience. And what it does is it kind of goes through the activity that you were just going through. Now, he did it kind of like you're doing it. He wasn't a researcher, he wasn't an academic. He worked in a lab, as I believe it was for a big corporation in a training facility. And through his observations, he decided there were ways that people learned better and ways they didn't learn as well. And that there were certain kinds of outcomes from certain kinds of learning tasks. This is a really important piece of modern education, is to realize what you do will affect what they learn. So it's a little bit about engineering the experience to get the outcome that you want. You can't, for example, have someone read and expect them at the end to be able to create. You'll see that reading has a set of outcomes associated with it. Define, describe, list, explain. But if you want somebody to do more than that, you have to engage them in experiences that involve more than just reading. Now, as I said, Dale was not an academic. He was not an educator. He was not an academic. He was not a researcher. But he used common sense, in effect, to create this model. Off to the side, you'll see 10%, 20%, 30% associated with how much you might remember from each of these activities. That's not a real number. That's just his estimate on things. So don't believe this like it's absolute research-based fact. But it has a lot of face validity. What I mean by that is when you look at it, it kind of makes sense. And Dale has been copied by a lot of other people, and I want you to understand this because as educators, you'll see that many models that you encounter along the way can be changed, can be manipulated. You can change them and manipulate them. Use what you understand and what you know and modify them to work in your environment. What I like about a couple of these models is, over here the bottom says active learning and the top says passive learning, and in the middle they've flipped it upside down, and so it's the other way around. But you can see the kinds of learning activities that are passive. Passive meaning you do them by yourself, quietly, sitting, listening, reading, whatever it is. The other ones are active, meaning you're going to be up, moving, engaged with other people, involved with the content more. Modern educational environments tend to be more active and less passive. There's some of both, but it's more active. That's the important part. And by being more active, you get higher levels of outcomes. You get creativity, you get problem-solving skills, analytical skills, things that are desirable in the modern workplace and in life, actually. Another important thing to keep in mind, especially as you're teachers or as you become teachers, curriculum is not instruction. Curriculum is a guide that tells you about the outcomes, may give you some idea about how to approach teaching, but it's not instruction. To do instruction, you need to do instructional design. Kind of like an architect designs a building, you need to design the instruction. These 9 events that I have listed here are my adaptation of some work that was done by an academic, a scholar, a researcher, and so forth, named Robert Gagne He created the 9 events of instruction a long time ago, but they're as valid today as they were then. The important thing is to remember that in this model, you have to prepare the student to learn. You can't just say, let's read page 1. You have to give them some idea why they would want to read page 1, what they're going to learn from page 1, how page 1 relates to something they already know or that they're going to be doing in the future. And then you engage them in the experience of learning. Hopefully it's not just reading page 1. Maybe reading page 1 gets them set to do an experiment or an activity or collect data, generate a report, work on a problem, something like that. After you've engaged in the experience, you help them figure out what they're learning and how it relates to what they already know, how they can retain and recall it, and then give them some opportunity to practice, provide feedback. And then the part that is, well, not the whole part, but after you've trained them, after you've educated them, then there are the post-instructional activities where you assess their learning and then you provide some extension opportunities. Extension opportunities are probably the most neglected thing in a classroom. The opportunity to take what you've learned and actually use it. And in a modern educational environment, we're not just educating people, we're educating them for a purpose, giving them skills, competencies, knowledge, expertise, providing them with access to resources so they can do things. So it's that doing things that really helps them keep what they've learned and be able to use it in life. Now, curriculum not being instruction, you start out with the outcomes. The curriculum outcome comes from the Ministry of Education. You find out what you're supposed to accomplish in grade 10 physics, okay? You know what you're supposed to do. What you need to do then is add to that. Sorry I couldn't find a funny sketch of a female, or I'd have put a female up there. So you need to take that outcome guide, the curriculum guide, think about it, answer some questions, come up with some activities, start the engineering process. Consider the model that you are going to use to design the instruction. Consider the resources that are available to you. The venues, by that I mean you don't have to do everything in the classroom. You could go out into the field, the schoolyard, you could go up and down the street in the city, you could visit a business. There are lots of places where education can take place besides sitting in rows in a classroom. You take the resources, the venue, the design, you create then your instruction. You know, the whole collection creates the instruction. You're engineering that instruction using the information and skills and what's in here. Now, the learner-centered classroom is a phrase that is used a lot. The learner-centered classroom is the environment that modern education is built around. And it's very different than what has happened in history. In the past, there was a teacher, and the teacher was the center of the classroom. Unfortunately, I'm modeling that behavior right now. You stand at the front of the classroom, you talk to everybody sitting in rows. And maybe you have a book and you read it, you pass out a test and everybody takes it, and that was the way that teaching was done. Now, in a learner-centered classroom, it's very different. Things are going to be active. The first line there is really important. Learner-centered classroom. It engages students in hard, messy work of learning. Now, hard and messy. It's hard because it's not as easy as picking up the book and saying page 1, page 2, page 3. You have to do that thinking and planning in advance, engineer the experience, look at the outcomes you're trying to achieve, look at the levels on something like Dale's cone of experiences, figure out what level or activity will help me achieve this level of outcome. If I want somebody to solve a problem, I can't have them read a textbook. If I want somebody to create a model, I can't have them, listen to a lecture. I've got to involve them in experiences that will help them build the competencies they need to produce the outcomes that are expected by that curriculum guide. Now, I cited where this came from, but if you do a search on the topic, you'll find 1,000 different references along those lines. I'm going to pass out some paper now. While you think about what model eliciting activities are. Anybody have any ideas what model eliciting activities are? How about if you just pass that way, maybe tomorrow, maybe this side. What's a model eliciting activity? Do those words mean anything to you?
Separately, yes.
Separately, yes. Well, to be fair, about 10 years ago, they didn't mean anything to me either. I own a company, and that company got a big grant, and the grant was to build model eliciting activities, and people, unfortunately, in my company knew what that meant, and I got educated along the way. The piece of paper that you have, we're going to use it. Keep it blank, keep it nice and smooth. But first, model eliciting activities are activities that engage students, encourage students to create models, to invent them, test them, and hopefully make some decisions based on what they learn. They're generally caused by, or promoted using open-ended problems. So I'm going to give you a problem, and that's what the white piece of paper is for. I want you to build a paper airplane. Now the goal of this activity is, I want to know what model of airplane, what design of airplane will fly the furthest. I also want to know which one will stay in the air the longest. So how would you go about determining that? So right now I want to start with everybody building a model airplane. You know how to do that? Everybody know how to make an airplane? If not, team up with someone who can teach you.
Those are two different models of
These are two models. You don't have to use these. Just make a model of your own. Just make a model of your own. If we were in a classroom, I might make an assignment, go online, look up airplanes, paper airplanes, find a bunch of different models, pick the one you think looks like it's going to go the furthest, or stay in the air the longest, build it, test it, gather data, report back to me, and so on. I'm sorry, what?
Can we test them?
In just a moment, you'll do exactly that. Keep in mind, you want to build a plane that will either fly far or stay in the air a long time. Maybe that'll influence your design, maybe it won't. Don't throw your airplane, please. We don't want to poke anyone's eyes out. If you get your airplane finished, would you please come up to the front? Once you've made your airplane, come up to the front.
If we like our.
No, regardless. Everybody's involved. I feel so bad for some of you. Obviously, you've never made an airplane before. If you have children or cousins or nephews, young people, go home and help them build an airplane. It's an important part of growing up. Obviously, Nino didn't get to do this. Come on up, Nino. It looks like it's as finished as it's going to get. Okay, now, if you aren't up here, in a moment, we're going to throw airplanes. I don't want anybody to get hit in the face, so if you're still sitting there, you might want to come up here, or you might want to cover your eyes or something. Safety is important in the school.
Someone can say that in Georgia.
All right, those of you who are up here, some of you form a line right across here and throw your airplane that way. Watch your airplane, see how far it goes. I want to know in your group which one is the last one to land and which one goes further. So, form a line. Throw. That was sad. Okay. The next group, line up and throw Throw your airplane.
You should differentiate by gender.
Oh, they are.
Ready? Get set. Throw. Very good. Yes. Okay. All right. Next group. Line up.
Watch out.
Okay, everyone, be careful of your eyes. Careful of your eyes. Ready?
Oh,
Set.
Sonia.
Throw.
There it is.
Oh, nice. Thank you. Now, if we were trying to, please take your seats, pick up your airplanes.
Take your airplane.
If we were in a classroom and you were working with students and you wanted them to be able to answer these questions, what might they do to be able to answer those questions? Well, they would build a model. Why? Because this activity is supposed to elicit model building. It's supposed to help you build a model and give you the opportunity to build a model. So you might create a table like this. A group might create a table like this. If we had a long time and we were working on this as a class activity, it would take a while to do this. But the results are very important. You learn a lot through this kind of an activity. You learn how to collect data. You learn how to collaborate and cooperate. You learn how to make assumptions. You learn how to determine whether something is true or false, factually. And importantly, you would probably also learn all the things that influence how far your airplane goes besides the way the airplane is made. How hard did you throw it? How high did you throw it? Was there any wind? How heavy was the paper you were using? There are lots of things. But for this activity, the students might just collect data, build several different designs, and collect data. Somebody might stand out there and time how long the airplane is in the air before it hits the ground. Somebody else might measure the distance. You fill in the chart, you calculate the averages, and then when you figure out the averages, you can say, well, this model consistently does better than the other models. And then you might have different groups with different models, and they compete against each other. And you learn a lot about it, but you also learn a lot about what data didn't you collect that is important. And that model building activity is very important in many careers. It's very good for problem solving and so forth. We're running short on time here, so I'm going to sort of scurry through a few things. But if you want to come up with activities like the sorting activity that I showed you, or the model building activity, there are many, many different sources. Excuse me. They're online. They're sometimes hidden under different names. Not just learner-centered activities or learner-centered classrooms, but all kinds of other names. And so you might want to search for names of approaches to education that are beyond just learner-centered classrooms. But you'll find hundreds of different kinds of activities. Now, we're going to wrap up with one, maybe two activities. I think the next one I'll cut short because we're really short on time. But if you still have your airplane paper and a pencil, I want you to do an activity called a 3-2-1 activity. 3-2-1 activity is this. Reflect on what I've talked about so far. Think about what I've been saying. And then write 3 things that you learned, 2 things you don't understand, and 1 thing you enjoyed or found interesting. Okay? Can you do that real quick? Write it down.
I don't want to be associated with my plane.
I see. Okay. The important thing here is what I'm causing you to do through this activity is to reflect on what's been talked about. You know, it's not like you read a page and then you read another page, you read another page, the bell rings, you go to the next class. In this activity, you have to think about, well, what did I talk about? I talked about Dale's phone. I talked about, Donnie's 9 events construction. I talked about education being information dissemination training and information dissemination training and education. I talked about a whole bunch of other things, which we'll look at in just a minute. But by going through this activity, it causes you to think, well, what do I remember? That's line 1. Line 2, you think about what didn't I learn or what don't I know that I wish I understood better. So that gives you something to be studying or asking about after class. And then line 3 just makes you think about how much fun you had. Okay? Now, if you were in a small group, you could do these things. Compare your responses to other people's responses, maybe help people understand things they didn't understand, and so on. Ask, why did you enjoy looking at Dale's cone? That wasn't very interesting. I enjoyed throwing airplanes. Well, I enjoyed sorting all the learning activities. You could talk about it and learn from that experience as well. Now there's another activity that I had planned. I'm going to save you from that. This activity, mapping. Have any of you done any kind of mapping with students or as a student? Does the term cognitive mapping mean anything? Cloud mapping, bubble mapping, any of those terms?
Just one way to essays who are making the ideas.
Yeah, it's a way to connect ideas. So I was going to ask you to do this. On a piece of paper, create a map of the presentation I just made. Okay, what was the topic? How did I break it down? What were the things that spoke out from that? Your map wouldn't have looked anything like mine, but here's what mine looked like. The bigger the bubble, the more important the topic. So I started out talking about modern education, broke that into a variety of things, teacher being defined, information dissemination, training, education, learner-centeredness. Then I went from learner-centered to education, broke those out into additional pieces. They linked together in a variety of ways. You probably would have come up with a different map. And the reason for that is each individual constructs information in a different way. You remember things differently than the person sitting next to you. So your map could be different and still be exactly right. And to you, it's helpful because it's the way your brain is organized. So there's no right answer here. If I were to be scoring this as your teacher, I might say your whole cloud focuses on the learner-centered side of things. What about the side that looks at education? Or you only focused on the activities. What about the models that were in there? So it would be a way to help you learn about the things that you haven't included in the map yourself, to remember them, to figure out how to get to the other items. And those relationships are what help you remember it in the future and be able to bring it back and to use it. If you can't connect what you're exposed to, you're not going to be able to bring it back later and use it. And that's the point of engineering the experience, is to create an experience that results in the learning outcomes that you want so that the learners can use that information in the future. It's not just to finish the book. So, almost last slide. Engineering experience, what does it mean? Why do you think I said how you teach influences learning? This is turning a lot more into a lecture than I was hoping. I'll tell you what I think it means. I think if you engineer your experience properly, you can achieve different levels of learning. You might get people to remember something, define something, describe something, be able to recreate it, to expand upon it, to use it in a problem that requires bringing together multiple pieces of information. So learning is influenced by the experience that the student goes through. Similarly, assessment. You change assessment activities because you're changing learning activities and your expectation of the kind of outcome. In a learner-centered environment, you can't just do paper tests anymore. You have to give opportunities to build, to experience, to demonstrate. Those are the kinds of activities that show learning at a higher level and will allow the learners to be more advanced as they move forward in their educations. If all they know are the facts that they write down on a piece of paper, they're not going to succeed in the modern environment. The world, information changes too fast, Those facts will be ancient in another 5, 10 years. What they need to know is how to do things, how to think, how to reason, how to apply skills to solve problems, create solutions, and so forth. And the only way to do that is to, in school, give them those experiences, to engineer the experience and to assess it in a way that's important. I said the map, if I gave you the map problem, everybody's map would be different. As the instructor, I can't just go through and check, did they connect this to that, this to that, because that's not the way your brain works. What I need to look for are, do you have the important points, and are those important points correctly connected and associated? And if they're not, I can help you with it. But it's not like I can just say, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, right, wrong, right, wrong, right, wrong. That isn't going to work. It's harder for me. But it's also more satisfying. The harder, I believe, and I've experienced myself, the harder you work preparing a lesson, teaching a lesson, the more satisfying it is for you. If all you do is walk into the room and pick the book off the shelf and say, okay, everybody on page 99, start reading, that isn't going to be very satisfying. But if you work with students, you see them grow, you see their brains start to develop skills and abilities they never had before, then you're an educator. If all you're doing is standing in the front of the room talking at them, you're still a teacher. And although the term will be around for 100 years more, the meaning of the term is not very appropriate for the environment today. And then just lastly, the slide that I showed you with the model on it, the 9 events and so forth, I tried to structure my lecture presentation session today around those 9 events. And this is how it worked out. Whoops, wrong, I'm a slide ahead of myself. Homework. You all have homework. There's a video, and I don't know how we can make these slides available to you, but we'll do that. Maybe we need to get you to sign a piece of paper with an email address or something. We'll get you access to these slides. But this website has an excellent video that was shared with me by a young woman sitting in the corner over here, Sonia. It's an excellent video on sort of the modern classroom, and it covers a lot of the same things that I talked about. See, you guys are so far ahead of me. You whipped out your phones, started taking pictures. You don't need these slides. Okay, I want you to watch this video, because it'll take the skills and things that we talked about today and move you a little further along. Then I'd like you to take an activity, an outcome that you might be teaching science or English or literature or something. Take an outcome from that curriculum and figure out how would you use your brain or the online resources to make it an active learning, learner-centered kind of an experience. And then I want you to send me a note. That's my email address. Send me a note and say, you are so wrong. Or I enjoyed that so much, I'll never teach the old way again, or whatever. But I'd like to hear from you. It'll help me immensely if you write in English, because I can't read Georgian. But if you write to me in Georgian, I'll get someone to help me figure out what it says. All right? And then lastly, as I was saying, I kind of broke things out by which slides addressed which kind of an activity, just so you knew that I was kind of practicing what I was communicating. Okay? I wanted you to understand that these models are useful. I've been designing instruction for much longer than probably anybody in this room has been alive. But anyway, these kind of models, whether you use this one or another one, they're very helpful. Because they cause you to think about, have I done all the things I need to do to engineer this experience to achieve the outcomes I want? Thank you.
Thank you.
What you described and talked about, in theory, our teachers understand. But in practice, it is very difficult to implement unless you're taught that way, unless you really understand the concept. However, during the past, I would say, 10 years, we have new textbooks in schools that are structured so that it already includes, it's very limited, but it does include some examples of what an interactive teaching would look like, including, for example, in history, going to archaeological sites, to museums, to some, different venues. And it does include, but what I have experienced with my own kids, teachers follow it as a given, as an instructor. They don't go beyond. So do you think such textbooks are useful, or when every teacher does the same, what is written in the textbook, it limits the creativity of the kid, of the students?
It limits everyone. Those textbooks are useful, but they're only useful as a resource. They can't be the sole source of information that guides the instruction. If they do that, they're teachers. And what I'd like them to become is engineers, engineering the educational experience. Because if they just follow what's in the book, you can bring anybody in to follow what's in the book. You need someone who comes in, who thinks about it. I pointed to my head a few times, use your brain. The information from your brain is the best resource for this. You can go online, watch YouTubes. There's a whole section of YouTube stuff. You can go online and Google a million different resources, some even in Georgian. You can use your brain, talk to your colleagues. One of the things that we're encouraging is study groups among teachers so that you have colleagues to share ideas. Next month I'm supposed to teach about this, but I don't know how to do it. As a group, figure it out. Everybody goes back and does it. They'll all do it a little differently, but the idea is you're not alone. You can't rely on a single source, and you have to be creative, and frankly, it's harder work. It's easy to come in and open a book. It's harder to, before the students get there, plan the experience, create the resources, know how you're going to assess it, know how you're going to move among the group during classroom assessment activities, coaching and mentoring students as you go. But that is what makes being an educator in today's world rewarding and important and successful. So you can't just follow the book. And hopefully through the kinds of activities MCA and MCC are doing, teachers will get exposed to that repeatedly, and they'll experience it themselves as learners and be able to do a better job as educators.
Thank you.
Yes?
I have a question about the project of preparing school teachers and school directors.
Yes.
Can university students from education field or graduates participate in implementing this project, like volunteers or interns? Do you?
Oh, that's a really fun idea.
That's a great idea. Let's figure out a way to
I think it's an excellent idea. I don't currently think there's a mechanism in place to have kind of interns working on the project, students from universities and the like, but I would strongly encourage that we, Nino, I would strongly encourage that we try to build into the project an opportunity to recruit people, students or others from the community who want to help participate in this. Thanks for the idea. If you would like to do that, contact Nino. All right, other questions? Again, thank you. I find that Georgia is right on the edge of kind of making a breakthrough into modern education. Tremendous opportunities ahead for Georgia. And it's up to all of you to make that happen. So I hope you do. And if I can help, let me know. You have my email address. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.